Right. Okay. So, hi everyone. Welcome. If you're joining us live on YouTube, then welcome live. If you're joining us on the Zoom call, welcome here. Um, first, from my, let me introduce myself. I'm Rushva. I'm the curator of the Global Shapers community in Mumbai, and we are so excited to be hosting this conversation along with Fashion Revolution and as part of the Shaping Fashion project. Before we begin, I just thought it would be great to give a little introduction about the Global Shaper community. So, born out of the World Economic Forum, the Global Shaper community is a community of change makers across the world that focuses on creating change at the grassroots level. It's not a. It started off about 10 years ago. This 2021 will be 10 years of the Global Shaper community, which is amazing. And we've grown to more than 15,000 shapers across 450 hubs in more than 150 countries. And so we're very, very excited to be a part of this global network. The Bombay hub has been active since for about 9.5 years. We'll also be completing 10 years this year, which we're very, very excited about. And we've been working actually on a various series of projects. One of them, of course, is Shaping Fashion, which Karan leads. We have a bunch of other projects linked to education, menstrual hygiene, hunger, LGBTQ rights. And we're also working on some interesting new ones with coding and AI and technology. So I think we keep trying to push the boundaries, so to speak, and we're very excited to have this panel really to continue to do that. One of the things that's very interesting about this panel discussion today is that it's part of the Davos Lab. The Davos Lab is born out of the Great Reset. So in June 2020 last year, Professor Klaus, who's the head of the World Economic Forum, thought about how can we recover from this pandemic in a better, in a greener, in a more sustainable way. And that was the whole concept of the Great Reset, which is the main agenda focus for the World Economic Forum this year. And adding to that, the Shapers will be hosting conversations like this one to really understand various topics within the Great Reset, which is now set as called Davos Lab. And we will be feeding these conversations and the inputs from these conversations into a policy document that looks at a youth-focused recovery plan set at the World Economic Forum annual meeting this year in Singapore. So we are very excited. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Karan Kumar, who is leading our Shaping Fashion project, and he will take over from here. And welcome to all of you. And thank you so much, particularly to all our panelists who were amazing and awesome to actually take out time and join us today.
Thanks, Rushva, and thank you again to all our panelists and everybody here. I'm very excited to host each of you, and just setting some context. So as Rushva said, I lead Global Shapers, this project called Shaping Fashion for the Bombay Hub. And the idea of Shaping Fashion is that it's a project in partnership globally with Fashion Revolutions. We're lucky to have Suki here as well to talk about that a little bit. Where as global shapers, we're trying to see locally in the hubs that we work in, how we can actually drive more sustainable fashion activity, awareness among consumers, and also advocate for changes in supply chains through our engagements and projects. One of the projects as such is a collaboration with the Davos Lab Dialogues, which is where we start this session off today. And to do that, I'm just so grateful to have a wonderful set of panelists here to start this dialogue and then hopefully create a ripple for change going forward. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Karan, another Karan from the Global Shapers Bombay, to kick us off and introduce our panelists and start things with our discussion. And I'll come back later. But Karan, would you like to take over?
Yeah, thank you so much, Karan. That was a great opening. So like everyone sort of said, we're here today to really examine how customers can make better choices and how these choices can sort of shape transformative change with the brands they interact with as consumers. And with the format of today's dialogue, we'll have sort of a short opening by each speaker, and then we'll engage a little bit deeper with what's been said. I'd also like to invite the audience to drop in questions in the chat, and we're happy to sort of take them as we go along. And with that, I'd like to introduce our speakers for today. So we have four really lovely people. They represent different perspectives within the space. We're joined by Suki Dusange-Lenz, the country head for Fashion Revolution India and a champion for the need for a fair and transparent fashion industry. We have Dia Mirza, an actor and producer and the UN Secretary General Advocate for the SDGs, as well as the UNEP Goodwill Ambassador. We also have with us Dharshi Panda, the Associate Director for Sustainability at Flipkart. She is responsible for implementing sustainability initiatives at scale across the e-commerce value chain. Last but not least, we have Priyanka Khanna, the International Expansion Manager for Fashion for Good, and she leads the innovation platform in South Asia, where she connects brands, supply chain partners, and innovators in order to drive a circular transition. And with all of that really being said, I'd like to start with Dia to open up the floor for our discussion, especially around the large role sort of that fashion has to play in the climate space, because the more sort of glamorous angle to it is far more well represented. And maybe you could shed a bit more light about this.
Thank you, Karan. I'm very happy to be a part of this conversation today. It's an important one, and I think it's a conversation that's going to shape our community for sure, and help us all learn to recover better from this global crisis that we're all trying to emerge from. And yes, you're absolutely right. There is a huge climate impact on caused by the fashion industry. In fact, it's a bigger polluter than the. I think it's important for me to share some important statistics here, because before we get into explaining why climate is so deeply impacted by it, I think it's important to get the numbers or the data. It will just give us all more clarity. Fashion, of course, as we know, is one of the top polluters globally, and the number one source of microplastics in our oceans. This is something we just don't talk enough about. And this is something that we definitely need to start paying a lot more attention to, about how most fabrics are huge contributors to microplastics. I remember seeing this image of a stretch denim that had, kind of biodegraded partially, so only the cotton from the denim had degraded, but all the plastic in the denim. And I didn't realize that, those stretch denims that we wear are made with plastic. So big eye opener for me. I hope it is for everybody else who's watching today. With an enormous carbon footprint, obviously. It's also a $2.4 trillion behemoth, employs upwards of 300 million people, grows by 4 to 5% every year, and is likely to reach 3.3 trillion by 2030. It also accounts for 10% of the total greenhouse gas emissions, more than all international flights and shipping put together. Now, when we speak about climate and the emergency that we are facing, and then we talk about the numbers that I just revealed to you, there is bound to be the question of how are we going to change this, and how are we going to reduce the greenhouse emissions and the carbon footprint of the fashion industry if it empowers so many millions of people across the world and generates as much revenue as it does. And I think it's upon us, young people and innovators, and every one of you out there who's willing to acknowledge this reality and say this has to change. Because there is no way we can move forward in the fashion world knowing this and continuing to do the damage that we are already doing.
Lovely. Thanks so much for that. And I think when we talk about sort of the education in this space, really making the education bit and the innovation side really sort of interact with in really important ways. And maybe Darshi, this is a question for you. But what are the trends in the innovation space of enabling consumers to make better choices, and maybe the role of Flipkart in this sort of transition?
I think one of the things, first of all, thank you, Karan, for inviting, and I'm so glad this has been put together in the first place. One of the things that Flipkart very actively tries to do is, really build partnerships and build relationships, not just for for the business itself, but also for making sure that the environmental and social aspects of running a business are fully covered, so we constantly are exploring partnerships with small medium business owners. We're constantly exploring partnerships with researchers, with innovators, trying to make sure that our entire value chain, from the manufacturing, from the farm, all the way down to the consumer, as well as beyond. When you're, let's say, thinking about circular economies, how do you make sure that entire value chain is supported with the right kind of infrastructure, with the right kind of ecosystem awareness that is required? And that's something that is very deep rooted in what Flipkart does. And I think we've started with small bits and pieces here and there, whether it be really our plastics journey. We've covered where our packaging is converted 50%. We started somewhere around our logistics journey, where we've committed really to going 100% electric. But there are so many opportunities, I think, within the sustainability space, looking at many different types of partnerships and relationships that we can continue to explore. And I'm really excited. I think going by my previous experiences working with nonprofits and working with climate change leaders here and there, I think I'm very excited about this. There is a lot to be done still, for sure, but the concept and the work of sustainability could not be more relevant now than it is.
Lovely comments there. We're excited too, definitely. And I think I'll pass it now to Priyanka. And maybe what we'd want to hear a bit more from you is on technology, how technology has sort of enabled customers to access information about supply chains, and maybe how innovation can play like a much larger role in enabling this consumer engagement.
Thank you, Karan. And thank you everyone for being here. It's very exciting to be part of this panel. Most of the panels that, so Fashion for Good engages in two different ways. I want to quickly introduce it if people don't know Fashion for Good here. So Fashion for Good, well, good is in our name. So our objective is really to drive good in the fashion industry, make the fashion industry sustainable. Echoing everything what Dia said about the statistics, we identified those as challenges much early on. And based on that, we curated this platform with lots of brands, manufacturers, industry together to on one side, work on the innovation. So we work as an innovation platform wherein we bring on board partners, but also the technologies that Karan just mentioned, and we help scale them in the supply chain. The objective being that if these technologies are scaled, then actually there is sustainability or circular economy can be driven in the whole fashion industry. On the other side, we work on convener of change. We have a museum here in Amsterdam. This is a Netherlands-based platform. We also do a lot of B2C work to actually educate customers to take better decisions and right decisions around sustainability, or be more aware and take educated decisions. So playing in that spectrum in the last 4 years, where we are talking about industry and helping the innovation scale up, as well as customers, I think we've been privy to a very interesting change that's happened in the last couple of years. We started out with looking at what are these technologies that can transform the industry. Now we've looked at around 2,500 plus technologies, and our learnings and understandings out of everything that has happened in the last few years in this industry is that adoption of these technologies will drive sustainability or circularity. Now that adoption can be driven by multiple stakeholders. Ideally, when we started off, we said brands need to drive it. Then we realized, oh, brands don't necessarily own their supply chain. So we also need to add in the supply chain partners. And then the final aspect, the final user is the consumer, the final consumer of the product. So they also have a huge say in it, as well as they should be the ones influencing also. So I think our learnings are technology is the key for the future, whether it's on new raw materials, whether it's different ways of doing business, or whether it's recycling in more hard tech, the non-sexy technologies that consumers don't necessarily interact with. Those are all the key for transformation. But some of them have to be really pushed on by the brands. But then we also need the consumers to talk about rentals, sustainable business models. How do we extend life cycle of a product? How do you use what's in your closets? So that's where our understanding is. I think that's it for me now.
Thank you. Very cool stuff, definitely. And sort of like I mentioned, I think earlier, was that the key concern is how we can make this industry transition one that really is consumer-led, right? And Suki, you know, at Fashion Revolution, you occupy sort of a unique perspective on this intersection. And maybe you could want to sort of bring up how we should really be conceptualizing this, the ability for consumer to create a tangible shift in a textile value chain.
Thanks, Karan. Firstly, it's a pleasure to be here in this. Our mission at Fashion Revolution is really to inform and empower people to make better choices and to take massive action, as well as little action that amounts to something great in the end. Should I just give a little snapshot of Fashion Revolution and then I'll jump right in. So Fashion Revolution was born in 2013 as a response to the Rana Plaza disaster, when a factory collapsed in one day, killing over 1,000 people in just one go because a factory was not maintained well. Garment workers were complaining for a number of months on the build up to this. Their voices were not heard, they were largely ignored. And in one day, in one moment, a factory collapsed. This isn't the first time that's happened. It's happened around the world in different countries and on different scales. Fashion Revolution was born as a result of Carrie Summers and Ursula de Castro. They said something has to be done, let's take some action. And the campaign has developed since 2013 and is now in about 90 different countries. And it really has spread because there's a lot of people out there that just say they want change, they want to, they understand and recognize not just the environmental emergency, but the urgency of the livelihoods and workers that are just being largely ignored. So essentially, our mission is to have a cleaner, more safe and more transparent fashion industry. We really have a multifaceted approach. We want a more conscious consumer. We want more responsible manufacturing and more responsible retailers. And we also want greater governance. And we do a lot of policy work globally. In India, we've been largely volunteer-led for the past 6-7 years. We have a lot more work to do. It's a marathon, not a sprint. We've just started walking. We want more of you all to walk with us. And our mission is essentially moving forward because of collaborations and individuals all over the world taking action. I just wanted to quickly mention a couple of things on the back of what Dia said. Waste is also a huge issue. So on top of all that making that we're doing, there is every second about a truckload, a dust cart load of waste that's just thrown into landfill. We're responsible for that, us, the consumer. We should not be viewing our clothes as waste once we're done with them. But we can dive into that a bit later. And also another issue, gender is a massive thing that we need to address in the fashion industry. About 80% of garment workers are women. It might be 80%, yeah, I think 80% of the women, of people that work in the textile industry around the world are women. Now, it does beg me to ask the question, are their voices not being heard? And is this also a gender issue? Because, you know, it's pointing that it's largely screaming that it is. There's multiple things that we as consumers can do. Firstly, inform yourself. Find out what is the problem, what is the issue, how can my buying power and how can my choices affect real-time change? And it can. If you join in campaigns that Fashion Revolution is part of, and one of them is the Who Made My Clothes campaign. You might have seen these graphics on social media and around the place, maybe in stores in some places, but essentially asking this very simple question to the brand that you are wearing is letting that brand know that you care, that that worker that has been part of making this garment that you're wearing has been paid fairly, that the brand is also considering people and planet on their mission to give you these goodies that you receive. And don't think that your one action is not getting noticed. It is. We have impact reports that we issue every year, and they are being noticed. Our reports and our data is going up into those boardrooms, and perhaps Priyanka and Darashri are aware of some of the reports that hit the sustainability crews that are within large brand boardrooms that then hopefully hit a chairman, and maybe there'll be some change one day. So don't think that your little actions aren't going to be counted. They are. And reach out to Fashion Revolution in your area. There's always fashion revolutionaries around. You'll find us somewhere, not under some rock, but we're largely there with a little megaphone doing our bit.
That was great, Suki. I think also like really brilliant framing for the issues we want to look at today. So thanks, speakers, for all of your openings. I will also sort of keep some time for you to follow up on any points made by other panelists. And at the same time, I will also bring back our dear Karan to take forward some of these issues more deeply.
Great, thanks. One thing that really struck out was during this intro round, I think each of you has different aspects of the fashion industry that you're looking at. So Dia sort of brought in those major statistics. Priyanka was talking about innovation and technology, and I think Darashri has sort of some linkages there. And Suki, you're also bringing in the social angle. I guess I took some notes down, and perhaps, you know, stemming from Dia's point on microplastics, for instance. And I'd like to bring Priyanka and Suki in here to really understand a little bit more about what are the ways in which, or what are some of these technologies, for instance, Priyanka, that you know, consumers can help in mitigating microplastic pollution, because we know that a lot of it is from the end of use stage, washing and, you know, laundering and things like that. So how do we manage that? And Suki, I know that Fashion Revolution is doing some work around microplastics. So maybe once Priyanka gives us a little bit of insight there, I'd love to hear about that too.
Thank you, Karan. I want to say I can talk about the technology side, but one thing from a consumer perspective, and this is something we mentioned in our Take Action program, and I'm pretty sure Suki is well aware of that also, which is stop washing. You really don't need to wash your clothes that many times. I think when we talk about, especially in our museum, when should you wash your clothes? It's only when they are dirty. I don't think you require washing on a weekly or like 5 times a week basis, which sadly people still do, because washing is where most of the microplastics are released into the water. So avoid, especially your denims. I think you don't even need to wash them like once a month or even less than that until they're dirty. And the other aspect of microplastics from a consumer perspective is basically at the end of use. Extend it, find other ways to use that product or give it to someone else to reuse, but you should be responsible for what happens to your clothes after you actually give them out. So that process at the end of life, when you're done with that use, what happens to the clothes is technically your responsibility as a consumer as well. But I'm moving on to the innovation side. Actually, very interesting question, because we've really struggled to find innovations around microplastics. I think so far we're working with 1 or 2 innovations, which are really filters that are trying to capture microplastics. We have a company called Planet Care, for example. They are filters that can go into industrial machines as well as smaller machines. So you could use it for a very cheap amount in your own washing machines, and you capture that microplastics. But sadly, there's still not as many solutions of what you can do with them. So one aspect on technology here is changing the materials we are using, particularly in new clothes. So microplastics pretty much come from polyester or the fossil fuel based materials that come into your wardrobe, right? Everything that we own mostly has polyester blends or something or the other with polyester. So I think it's important to even see what you're buying. And then there are new technologies that are coming up within the material space, things like biosynthetics, which sadly haven't scaled up big enough to reach the consumers, but they are coming. So please watch out for them. There are other materials that you can swap and try to purchase less on the pure fossil fuel based materials, because they are the ones who create most microplastics. And then, of course, going into technologies around washing, like capturing of microplastics, like Planet Care I spoke about. There are a few other technologies around this. Sadly, it's not reached a scale which it will in future, hopefully, which consumers start interacting with this. But if you're a conscious, aware consumer, it's really good to start asking these questions now and start accessing the right materials, as well as trying to make changes in your life to actually use, to release less microplastics in the ocean.
I do like,
pass on.
Priyanka, I love that you said, you know, your clothes really don't need to be washed that often, and that's such a true fact. Like, just give up on washing a little, just let your clothes breathe. It makes a massive difference to our water and our ecosystem. You know, these are things that you can do immediately. There's nothing wrong with not washing as frequently. Be proud of it, actually. So look, we have, I'm surrounded by plastic specialists in Fashion Revolution. I'm not going to go deeply into this, but Carrie Summers, our founder, and also my colleague in India, Alia Gurmali, they are plastic, fantastic knowledge hubs. And I think we should do another panel just with them. And you'll really get to know the dark and dirty side of plastic, not just within your clothes, but also the packaging that it comes with. We have a campaign called #What'sInMyClothes, and that was an evolution of Who Made My Clothes. And it's really to just get a deeper insight into what's actually in our fabrics and fibers, because we realize that people don't really know. People don't really know what it takes to make a synthetic fabric and the effect of that on your skin. And your skin is one of your most prized organs, and it is living and it's breathing and it's absorbing everything you are putting on it. So do not take for granted, you know, don't take it on face value that your clothes aren't doing having some form of impact on your internal organs too. We've worked with a number of people, and we know that a lot of people have suffered illnesses because of the polyesters or synthetics that they're wearing, not just skin diseases, but internally as well. Fascinating subject. And we have a blog on our website called The Truth Behind the Label. I do urge you all to go on there to read a bit about what's in my clothes and the truth behind the label. And that's on fashionrevolution.org. But essentially, one thing to note is when you read labels about, and you might see 30% cotton and 70% polyester mix or something like that, I really ask you all to challenge that. Like, take a picture of your label, #What'sInMyClothes, post it on social media, ask the brands how they really know that, because it's largely not so vigilantly regulated. So they just can't be speaking the truth. They are guesstimates or approximates, because your garment passes so many hands before it even reaches the label phase. So there's a lot to talk about because it's such a massive subject and the supply chain is huge. But I hope I've given you a bit of a nugget there. To just...
Yeah, thanks so much, Suki. I want to bring Dia in here to really ask also, you know, from what Priyanka and Suki just said, I think one of the key areas that we can at least focus on as consumers, all of us here, could really be to help make our clothes last longer. Fashion Revolution has a campaign, for instance, called Make Your Clothes Last Longer. But what are some of the ways in which you think this could happen, Dia? And as a person with a large platform, how would you encourage customers and consumers to do this?
Karan, I mean, I can share what I have learned along the way. And of course, you know, when you discover how polluting the garment industry can be, and so much of what you wore unthinkingly in the past is such a huge polluter, water, soil, air, practically everything that we depend on for our survival. It really makes you reconsider your relationship with clothes. It also makes you reconsider your lack of questioning, and which is why I'm just so happy that, you know, the fashion revolution has given people the opportunity to ask the right questions, because I think it's the consumer's right to have the answers. Now, in a consumerist society where we have been taught to love anything that looks beautiful and not really question what goes into making that thing, I think to bring about that behavioral change will take some amount of effort. And what I try and do each time I buy a garment, so the first thing I ask myself is, do I really need this? it's it's a simple fundamental question. Do I really need this? And then of course, if the answer is yes, then I ask myself, where was this made? Who made this? What fabric is it made with? How was this fabric um, put together? Like how does this fabric come about? What is the environmental cost of this design or the fabric? So what I've learned along the way is to discover innovative designers locally who are doing wonderful clothing that is breathing with breathing fabric, is sustainable, have been so considerate of the environment that even their buttons and their tags are like made with rope or wood, and a lot of the wood is recycled or repurposed wood. And then, of course, the fabric is also many times repurposed or recycled. And so, yeah, I think for me, it's been about just identifying brands and designers who make a responsible, sustainable fashion and clothes. But most importantly is, do I need one more of this? and
We're all asking that question.
and to just kind of reduce your own consumption as much as possible, because the fact of the matter is, when we consume less, we waste less, and when we waste less, we're making a difference in our own way. The good thing though is that most of India's clothing does not land up in landfills. We as a society have inherited the culture of passing on, and a lot of the clothes that are discarded in urban centers are make their way to rural India. Now, the plus side of this is that the lifespan of the garment becomes longer. Having said that, what becomes unfortunate or scary for me is the fact that a lot of the polyesters and the fabrics that are degrading to the environment or polluting to the environment find their way to the remotest parts of the country, and there is no way of managing that. So they do land up in our rivers and our oceans and landfills and the like. So
Yeah.
I think it really starts with awareness, and then just making a better choice at an individual level, because I think we all have the power of choice.
Completely agree, and I want to bring Dharashri in here for maybe a flip side of this. And Dia, you said two things that I think may not sit that well with someone like Dharashri representing really the business and the industry. But one was less consumption, right? Dharashri, how does that?
Sounds on us wanting more, more,
Yeah.
more.
Yeah, but I'm curious to hear from Darshri about how she would think of that issue, right? And about the different ways in which the industry has multiple barriers to really also driving sustainability, and how you see this idea of consumption being more sustainable. The other point that I do want to raise is perhaps around how you as a business, or how businesses like yours are also engaging customers to try and do more local buying, like Dia was talking about. So two questions there, Darshi, but feel free to answer them how you like.
Sure. I think in my view, there are different kinds of systemic barriers, right? When you're talking about the entire industry sort of getting to the point where they're able to evolve alongside consumers. Our consumers are pretty, engaged and aware about what are the problems, where we are actually learning from them constantly, and we are trying to evolve alongside them, right? And that's something that's a very symbiotic relationship, I always say. Because what ends up happening is you have a very conscious consumer base who is really looking at different ways of trying to figure out, like Suki said, what is in my or like Dia said, where do my clothes go? Like Priyanka was talking about, how are the different how are the different processes even happening? How do I better my processes, etc. But the problem that I have seen is we are all trying to solve large systemic problems, but we're trying to do them in our own silos, right? You have organizations who are working solely on the consumer. You have organizations who are working solely on, let's say tier one manufacturers or mills, etc. It really needs that that more 360 view, and that's where I think going back to my opening remarks, businesses really must build those relationships, and a lot of times businesses tend to be scared of people who are advocates and people who are activists, but I think we should be really collaborating together instead of being at odds with each other. So that's one side of it. I think for your second question, where you were talking about really enabling both consumers and the industry to make like better decisions overall. I think when we are thinking about, let's say, democratizing sustainability, and that is something that Flipkart truly believes in doing, is democratizing the concepts we need to bring to and create that accessibility across everyone, right? So there are some primary principles that come to mind: affordability, availability, trust, awareness. All of these things become a really key differentiator when we're trying to solve some of these things. And going back to some of the programs that Flipkart has, we're trying to really create those partnerships across governments, across small, medium businesses, to bring that access to some of the more sustainable products, some of the more local products through our Flipkart Samarth program. So there are few different programs that are happening across the company, and I'm hoping that as we go down this journey further, we're just able to collaborate more and come up with better programs, having been informed by all of the people here. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Thanks. That's great. I do recognize that there is also one thing when it comes to, just generally more direct to consumer models than, going to a shop, or even when you're shopping like brick and mortar retail. And I think Suki might also agree, and probably everybody here, but packaging is a really, really big issue when it comes to sustainability, and your engagement as a consumer is also very quantified in terms of your environmental impact when you think about packaging. So Dharsha, can you tell me a little bit about, what your views are on packaging and sustainability around that? And Suki, I don't know if you want to add anything there.
I think I'll let Darashri jump right in, but as a conscious consumer and getting fed up with all the packaging I was receiving, I had to just stop buying online because it killed me. And during COVID times, it's really difficult when you're not allowed to go into a shop and you do need something. But it's a painful process for me when I just see unnecessary packaging, and online buying has added to that. So I'd love to celebrate companies that find more of a solution. I know it's a tough one.
No, for sure. I think globally, really, not only in India, globally, packaging in its many forms, whether it is the primary packaging that comes along with the product, or whether it is the secondary packaging that we put on the products when we're selling, and so on. So it has been a long-standing challenge, but it's also an opportunity to create that large-scale impact from a sustainability perspective, right? So one of the trends I think the entire sustainability community is really excited about is, of course, circularity. How do we really promote that further? further. Towards that, we've been experimenting with concepts like designing out the need for packaging altogether with what we're calling e-commerce ready. So continuing to just use the primary packaging itself and not really needing that additional layer of packaging, incorporating like more recyclable materials, and also thinking about how, because of shifting to those materials, we're not really creating another challenge. Because right now, if you think about it, if not plastic, the most scalable is potentially paper. But does paper also create its own challenges when it comes to biodiversity loss? It creates its own challenges when it comes to if you use it at that scale. So we're trying to think across the entire sort of value chain of the packaging as well, and trying to make sure that we are very thorough with what we're doing before we put things out. And going back to your point, Suki, of saying why does a small piece of product need to come with such a large box? We are experimenting internally. We try and figure out how do we really customize and fit to form packaging, because Flipkart, as one of the largest sort of e-commerce players in India, we do have all kinds of products going through our marketplace, right? It could be anywhere from a small little tennis ball to a large lamp, and the kind of shapes and sizes is incredible. But through all of these different things, and we're also piloting how do we take back some of the packaging. So there are all of these different things that we're trying to do, and thankfully we've been able to go down that path pretty confidently, and being able to reduce almost, like I said, 50%. And we're hoping to get to a point where we can say, yes, we're plastic free, and we're like super responsible in our consumption of packaging material. But yeah, there are very many examples of people who are doing that, and they're also trying to use the packaging as a way to spread awareness further.
And just and Darshri, and interestingly, like a little nugget, when the plastic bag was invented, and I think it was a Swedish fellow, and forgive me, I don't know his name, anyone in the audience can have a little hunt and share it in the chat, but I think it was a Swedish fellow, and he invented the plastic bag so that as a result of wanting something that could be reused and reused.
Right.
And I'm sure he would be horrified as to just the waste that plastic has generated and what the plastic bag has become. That was not its intention.
Yeah.
It's a little nugget to share there.
That's something that we talk
I think we got a name in the chat too. And, I just want to bring Priyanka in here, because Darshri mentioned some examples and, different kinds of materials. But Priyanka, from your perspective as a platform that sort of drives innovation, what are some of these cool examples or different ways in which packaging can be made sustainable?
I feel like Darshri already touched upon a lot of it, and then Suki added the reuse part, which was the one big aspect. In terms of technologies, I think at this point of time, the best thing that's happening within the packaging space is probably recycling. The technologies are relatively nascent, but you're starting to see more and more recycled content in most of the packaging that's going out, including, I think, Flipkart's packaging. What needs to see is how quickly can we evolve these technologies to give 100% recycled material, so that we are technically not creating any new virgin, or let's say not mining any new virgin materials, especially the non-renewed ones, including paper, because paper is like she said, there is a big impact on the biodiversity. We cannot afford to lose any more trees now. So it is important for us to, whatever kind of packaging we are looking at now, we're looking at recycling it or reusing it, or creating models wherein if it's biodegradable like paper, then people are actually biodegrading it. Because I know a lot of times we use these biodegradable bags and stuff, but The challenges around those are they are not necessarily home compostable. So you are putting it in your bin, but you don't exactly know what happens to it afterwards. So A, creating that the supply chain of where the biodegradable packaging material goes. B, looking at how can we create more reuse. We have some technologies. I would call it less technology, but more like physical. The companies that are just creating for e-commerce, for example, solutions like reuse bags. So it's just e-commerce, different shapes and size sort of bags, which is expandable and can be used. Let's say we have a partner called Zalando, which is a European e-commerce company. They are using some of these bags wherein the delivery people bring these bags back to them. So these are proper, great quality bags, which are probably going to last them 100 years. And that's one way of saying, at least for the standardized products, we can reduce these kind of packaging by creating more reusable packaging rather than the one-time packaging. Most of the packaging that we see right now coming is the plastics or even the paper boxes. We can't guarantee the life cycle increase of that or even recycling, because they could interact with water, they could interact with other materials in the plastic, which makes it much harder to recycle. So the technologies that make sense right now that are coming, which probably consumers will not interact with so much, is de-inking of these packaging, because all of these packaging have these very interesting inks on it, which is great to look at. But when you have to recycle it, we're screwed, because you can never bring them back to the virgin state. So how do we ink these technologies? How do we clean them? How do we clean the oils, the water, the product, any kind of product that can come on it? We clean that and then create a complete virgin material, which is so good in quality that the brands don't mind using it, the consumers don't mind using it because it's in high quality. So I think those would be some of the technology interventions that are happening quietly in the background. And hopefully in the next few years, you'll see that this isn't that much of a challenge anymore.
Yeah, I'm glad. And, I just want to say, in the interest of time, that we will be closing in the next couple of minutes. But before we do that, it's been such a great discussion. Thank you so much. I've heard a lot about the need for collaboration, the need to sort of really ask the right questions, whether you're asking the brand or asking yourself, as Dia had mentioned as well. And one thing that I'd like to do before we close is also just get each of you to start off with giving me a little bit of a round robin of what you really think from your perspective is a way in which we can drive more conscious consumerism over the next few months. As I mentioned earlier, Shaping Fashion is a project that's in partnership with Fashion Revolution. And every year, Fashion Revolution hosts the Fashion Revolution Week in April, marking the anniversary of the Rana Plaza disaster. And we'd like to sort of use these sort of takeaways to really build an engagement with our audience on ways in which they could really be more conscious. So it could be as simple as, like Dia said, ask yourself, do I really need this? Or something very complicated that one of you would like to pose as well. But, I'd like to start, and maybe I'll start with Dia, and then sort of, Dia, feel free to nominate the next person you see on the screen, and, we can just go that way. You're on mute. Yes, 1 second. Sorry. I think that's the line of 2020 and 21.
No, you just like muted me and I was like, okay. I just want to wrap this up, I think, with a very important statistic that I think will in many ways shape the way we consume and also shape the way we produce in India. Because by 2022, we're all set to become the world's 6th largest apparel market, worth $59.3 billion. And what we do here, every choice we make and the more sustainable it is, will have a ripple effect. So we can actually, as Indians, take it upon ourselves to set the precedent and ask ourselves those very important questions that we indicated through this conversation today, and see how we can redefine the way we do business and how we kind of take the fashion industry forward in India. It's very exciting times, Karan, because I think there are so many young, enterprising designers, established design houses also, who are making better choices every day. And it is really incumbent on also the retail market to step forward and stop any form of tokenism and recognize the urgency with which they need to meet sustainability goals. and targets, and put in place systems and interventions that are necessary for the sake of our survival and our health. Because we cannot, assume that the pace at which we've moved so far is decent or good. It's not. It's just not good enough. We need to keep reiterating the fact that the fashion industry is one of the biggest polluters on the planet, and we have to collectively do better as consumers and producers. So I hope, Dharashri, you take it from here and wrap this up with your insight on what you hope to do as well. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. I think taking from what Dia just said, I'll sum it up in like 4 words, right? Persist, partner, innovate, and make people aware. Like, just spread the message. You need a lot of persistence to make sure that everyone around you is really getting the message. Everyone around you understands what it needs to be done further, and continue to partner and innovate and try and figure out what are those technologies. How do we move away from what we are doing right now, and continue to really find those champions, who will support you throughout that journey. I think that's something that within e-commerce, within Flipkart, I've been able to be very fortunate and find those people very quickly. And I hope to continue to partner with them. But across the industry as well, I think Priyanka and I have exchanged quite a lot of calls and emails, and continuously talking about, like, how do we bring this in, right? How do we bring this into our industry? So those would be some of the messages that I'll leave with. And I think I'll let Priyanka maybe take it over next.
Thank you, Dharashri. I'll build on what you as well as Dia said. I mean, there are lots of like takeaway actions from a industry point of view, but I think because it's a very consumer focused forum, I'd like to leave messages for the consumers. Number one, I don't think consciousness is an option now. I think consciousness should be a given in consumerism. It's surprising that we haven't done it till now. And I think now it just needs to be a given part of consumerism. Should be no consumerism without actually consciously deciding on action. And this is not just for the fashion industry. I think this is for all sorts of consumptions. We're all consumers. Everything that we consume, I think, needs to be more conscious now. It's just like the food thing Suki said earlier, which was, at this point of time, we're also questioning everything. We're so careful about what we put in our bodies now, right? We want to have the healthiest things and the healthiest food. There's keto and all of the new fads that come through. It's the same with fashion to some extent. Like, it's as important as what we put on our body as we put in our body. So I think we need to start questioning and like making those right decisions now. But if I was to talk about a process of what a consumer journey should be, I think it should start with learning. There are a lot of tools available. There are tools like Fashion Revolution, there are tools like Fashion for Good. You go on these websites, you will find enough information as to what are the 3, 4 steps, 5, 6 steps you need to take on day-to-day life. Take that initiative and go learn. Once you learn, take action. There's a lot of action that needs to happen at an individual consumer level, whether it's washing less or buying better or reusing, circular business models, renting, buying secondhand, all of those actions. There is a long list of that. And then last bit, as Dharashri said, advocate. Because individually, yes, we all feel like we can't do much individually, but collectively, we really make a difference. We push our industry, we push the brands, we change the environment. So advocacy at that point of time, once you educate yourselves and start taking action on your own self, please start talking to people around you and advocate that everyone needs to talk about conscious consumerism. I think that's it for me. Thank you very, very much for inviting me.
Great. And Suki is the last one standing. So Suki, over to you.
So to bring all of that together, be curious, find out, do something, ask who made my clothes, tag in Fashion Revolution, tag in those brands, get the conversation going, and talk about it. Talk to your community about it. get engaged. We've got Fashion Revolution Week coming up, as Karan rightly said. There's a lot of alliances happening globally. You can also be a change maker. You probably are doing incredible work already in your community. Bring it together, activate something in FR Week. Let's honor those people that died at Rana Plaza disaster. Let's say we don't want that to happen again, not on our watch. It's been happening for years. The textile industry has been rife in just poor working conditions and XYZ. This is a larger issue. But let's come together and say that we want positive change, and let's really harness our power and make change happen. One garment at a time. Yeah.
That's very, very nice. And thank you. And to close us off, I think I'm going to hand back over to Karan. But before that, I just want to say thank you to each panelist and all of you. It's been such a wonderful, hasty, but wonderful discussion. And I hope we can continue this going forward. So Karan, do you want to close us off?
Yeah, and I think this was really an amazing chat. Again, thank you all the speakers, our partners, Fashion Revolution, and Shaping Fashion for sort of helping us put this together. And like I think Karan's already mentioned, this is sort of going to inform a larger campaign held in collaboration with Fashion Revolution. And this dialogue is really a basis for a much larger discussion, hopefully a much longer one as well. And we'd love to hear from the audience a bit as well. And if you've taken a bit from this session, so we put up a bit of a poll. And I'll take this time to maybe say that I hope you all also have a lovely weekend and have enjoyed this session as much as we did. So just going to give it a bit, and then we can probably show results as well.
Great. I think we have some great results.
Wow.
So hopefully we'll see some change going forward. Yeah, just a last hurrah. Thank you. And really following Suki, I think I'm going to steal that line, but yeah, changing one garment at a time. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Have a good day.
Bye. Have a good weekend.